Hi guys, in this video of the TypeScript series, we are going to discuss about the nullable types in TypeScript. So let's get started.
In JavaScript, you would have seen two primitive data types, namely null and undefined, where null represents a value that is not present and undefined denotes a variable's value that is defined but not initialized. Now, corresponding to two of these values, we also have corresponding types in TypeScript with the same names, that is null and undefined. Now, how these two nullable types behave in TypeScript depends upon the configuration of this strict null checks in TypeScript. So by default, it is set to true. Now let's do one thing. Let's set it to false and see what happens. Now let's take an example. Let's say we have a variable, call its value, and we assign it a type of number. And now if you initialize it with a value of null or undefined, you can see that TypeScript is not giving us any error. Or let's say we have another example. Let's say we have a variable called as message, which is a string, and you now give it a value of undefined. So again, you can see that we are not getting any error. So you can see that if this strict null check is set to false, then null and undefined can be assigned to any type in TypeScript. But this can lead to unexpected error during runtime. Let's see with an example. Let's say you want to access the property of a string, that is to find the length of a particular variable. So if we try to do this, you can see that we are not getting any error. Let's save this and try to run this and see what the error we are getting. So let's first compile this file called nullable types.ts, and once it is compiled, we can run our nullable types.js file that would have created. So you can see that you are getting a runtime error that cannot read property of undefined reading length. So in order to avoid these sort of errors during runtime, it's always advisable to set this particular one as true. Now we set this to true, you can see that we are getting error in our TypeScript file. If you hover on this value, you are getting the error that type null is not assignable to type number. Similarly, type undefined is not assignable to type string. So in this case, when this strict null check is set to true, null and undefined act as a distinct type in TypeScript, and they can only be assigned to a variable only when these types are set to null and undefined respectively. So you can see that all the errors are now gone, and since this is undefined, we cannot access this length property. So that's why we are getting this sort of error. So we get to know during the compile time itself that we cannot access the property that are not there in undefined or null. Also, we can use null or undefined in a union as well. For example, say this value could be null or a number. So you can use union over here to specify that. So you can write number pipe null. So now you can initialize it with either null or a number, say 1, 2, 3. Similarly, you can do it for undefined as well. Also, one key thing to note in here is null and undefined are completely different types. So when you define a variable with the type number or null, you cannot assign it a value of undefined. You can see that you are getting an error over here. Similarly, if a variable is defined as of type undefined, you cannot assign it a value of null. So we have already talked about the optional parameters and properties when we were discussing about, say, object type and function parameter type. So whenever this strict null check is set to true, then in those cases, TypeScript automatically assign that particular variable a union of undefined and the type that is initially assigned to it. Let's understand it better with an example that we took in the object type video. So there we had this example called as add. So this add was taking in this object numbers as a parameter, which has two properties x and y, where y was set as optional. So now if you hover on this y, you can see that this y property is automatically taking a union of number and undefined. Now you can call this function add with an object wherein x would be a number definitely and y could be a number, say 3, or it could have a value which is undefined. So you can see that you're not getting any error. But if you try to change this from undefined to null, you would get an error. So that's majorly it about the nullable types. Now in order to manage these nullable types more efficiently, in order to avoid bugs in your code, we will be learning about two very important operators in TypeScript, that is optional chaining and nullish coalescing, in our upcoming 2 videos. So if you found this video helpful, do hit the subscribe button. See you in the next one.